14 people got a letter in their file that spring. Ernie Kowalski got his day shift back, and the April transfer memo rescinded, which meant he slept in his own bed again for the first time in 7 months. And somewhere up at corporate, a phrase, redeployment review, was being struck out of a program document company-wide. I read the amended terms at my own kitchen table in reading glasses at 58 years old. It had taken an employment attorney exactly 1 page and 1 question to get there. 5 months earlier, a packet had landed on my desk with the word congratulations at the top and Susan Hale's name in the HR contact line. Congratulations on my voluntary retirement, which I had never mentioned to anyone because I wasn't planning one. They gave me 45 days to decide. Here's what that packet was really asking me to sign away: $180,000 of pension, because the window closed 5 months before my milestone. If you've ever been thanked and shown the door in the same sentence, you know the small cold click that follows. I've read staffing lists for 25 years. It's my job. So I turn to the page nobody reads, attachment C, and I read the ages. Before I tell you what those ages turn out to mean, if a packet like that has ever landed on your desk, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read them. This channel is for people who've learned that reading the attachment is a form of self-respect, and for the ones who come next who need to know it exists. If that's you, subscribing helps these stories find them before the window closes on theirs too. My name is Frank Delgado, and for 25 years, I've been the operations manager at Hartwell Industrial Supply. The person who knows which dock door sticks in cold weather and which forklift is due for service before the system does. I was 58 years old that morning, halfway through a warehouse consolidation I had designed myself, with a whiteboard full of move dates in my own handwriting. The packet didn't come through interoffice mail, either. It was couriered, tracked, signed for by the front desk, timed to arrive the same Tuesday morning as 13 others across 2 facilities, though I didn't know that part yet. Companies don't courier good news. Good news finds you in the hallway with a handshake. Paper that needs a timestamp is paper that's already been to a lawyer. That's the part one want you to sit with. They handed a retirement packet to a man in the middle of the biggest project of his career. Whoever built that list wasn't reading performance. They were reading something else. The packet was beautiful, in the way corporate documents are when someone expects them to be examined by lawyers. Voluntary Enhanced Retirement Program. A letter praising my years of service. A benefits summary in a friendly font. 6 months of salary as an enhancement. 45 days to accept, with a signature line that had my name pre-printed under it. At the bottom of the last page, the authorization line read, Meredith Crane, VP of HR Operations, a name I'd never seen, typed with the care of someone who knew this document would be read by lawyers. I read it twice at my desk, and then I did what 25 years of habit told me to do. I took it to Walt. Walt Brenner hired me in the spring of 2001, off a loading dock, because I was the only applicant who asked to see the racking layout before the break room. He'd been my general manager for most of my career. We had buried his father and married off my daughter in the same calendar year. If the packet was a mistake, Walt would laugh and fix it. Walt didn't laugh. He turned the packet over in his hands like he was checking it for damage, and he said, "It's a generous program, Frank." He used a phrase I'd hear twice more before this was over, reshaping the senior experience profile, said like reading off a script he hadn't written. Take the weekend. Talk to Rosa. And then he looked back down at his own paperwork, which is a thing Walt Brenner had never once done to me in 25 years of conversations. Walking back to my office, I wasn't thinking about pensions yet. I was thinking that the man who taught me to read a warehouse had just refused to read my face. Human Resources scheduled me for what the calendar invite called a program information session. Susan Hale ran benefits, careful, kind in a rehearsed way, the sort of professional who never says a sentence she hasn't said before. She walked me through the enhancement, the healthcare bridge, The outplacement services. Purely voluntary, she said. Nobody is being asked to leave, she said. The eligibility is role band based, she said. My band, my department, plain criteria, nothing personal. She slid a glossy folder across the table at the end. The outplacement service, career transition coaching. A stock photo of a gray-haired man smiling at a laptop. I remember staring at that photo longer than I should have. Somebody in a marketing department somewhere had been asked to imagine me, specifically me, and this was what they'd imagined: delighted, compliant, and already gone. Then I asked the only question I brought: why now? I was 58, mid-project, with a review file full of exceeds expectations. Susan smiled the way you smile at a question you were briefed on and said the company was creating opportunities for career transitions across the organization. Here's what she didn't say, and what I worked out that night at my kitchen table with the pension plan summary and a legal pad. My pension multiplier stepped up at age 60 with 30 years of service, the milestone I cross in a year and a half. Retire after that line, and the formula paid one way. Retire before it, and it paid another. I ran the difference 3 times because I didn't believe it the first twice. Across a normal retirement span, $180,000. The window on the packet closed 5 months before I crossed. 6 months of salary as an enhancement against $180,000 of pension. They weren't offering me a reward. They were offering me a discount on myself, with a deadline engineered to make it final. I didn't sleep that night. Rosa turned over once and asked if I was coming to bed, and I told her I wouldn't a minute, and then the minutes stretched to 3 in the morning with the ceiling doing the math for me. $180,000. 6 months of salary. The gap between them was 5 months of calendar. Less time than it took to consolidate the warehouse. Less time than seasonal flu season. The company had built a whole program around that span, counted the days, set the deadline on the far side of it, and mailed it to me in a folder that cost $12 to courier. I lay there until the numbers stopped meaning dollars and started meaning years. Years of work I'd already given them, now being priced in reverse. And when I asked Susan who else was eligible, she'd folded her hands and said, "That's confidential." It wasn't confidential. It was stapled to the back of the packet. There's a page in every group retirement offer that nobody reads. The lawyers put it there because for programs offered to people over 40, the law says they have to disclosure of the job titles and ages of everyone eligible. It exists so you can see exactly what you're being asked to waive. It arrives buried behind the tax notices, formatted to be skipped. I read staffing tables for a living. I didn't skip it. Attachment C, 14 rows. Job titles down the left: supervisors, senior planners, 2 managers, a quality lead. And a column of ages: 56, 58, 61, 55, 59, 57, 62, 55, 60, 58, 56, 63, 57, 58. Not one person under 55. Not one. I sat at my kitchen table and read that column the way you read a roster where something's wrong, top to bottom, then bottom to top, waiting for the exception that breaks the pattern. There was no exception. Whatever roll band based meant in Susan's script, the list itself had been selected by something with a birthday on it. Keep that column in mind, because the company was about to explain it, and the explanation is the part that still gets me. Over the next few days, I watched the list surface around the building, one face at a time. Nobody announced anything. That's not how these programs work. But you could track the packets by the closed office doors, by who suddenly took lunch off-site, by the planner who'd been loud about her opinions for 20 years going quiet in the Tuesday meeting. 14 people were doing 14 private versions of my kitchen table math, and most of them, I'd learn later, never turned to the back page at all. That's what the format was for. The packet said eligibility was determined by roll band and department. Fine. I maintain the org roster for my division. It's my working document, updated every quarter, and nobody at Hartwell knew it better. So I did the obvious thing, the thing I'd have done for any staff in question. I laid attachment C next to my roster and checked the criteria against the people. 3 colleagues sat in the exact role bands and departments the packet named. Dave in planning, 38. Marisol, senior supervisor on second shift, 45. Chuck at the quality desk, 54. Same bands, same departments, none of them eligible. Chuck missed the list by 1 birthday. And in the other direction, every single person 55 or older in those bands, across both facilities, all 14, eligible, no exceptions. A criterion that's really about role bands catches some younger people and misses some older ones. This one had caught the over 55s with a net that never snagged anything else. That isn't a role band. That's an age cutoff wearing a role band's clothes. Each piece alone had its innocent answer. Companies run exit programs, lawyers write clumsy criteria, coincidences happen. I've been telling myself those answers for a week. But sitting over those 2 documents, the pieces stopped being separate. A list that was all one age, criteria that didn't survive 1 pass of my own roster, a window that closed just short of my milestone. Alone, each was deniable. Together, they were program. I closed the folder, sat with the cover under my palms, and told myself the thing you tell yourself when the pattern is too clean, that I was an operations manager with a grudge and a calculator, not a detective. Companies are clumsy. Criteria misfire. Deadlines land where they land. I had worked at Hartwell long enough to know that incompetence explained most things that looked like conspiracy. I almost put the folder in my briefcase, but I didn't. I sat there and realized I was performing a doubt I didn't feel, because the part that scared me wasn't that the company might be innocent. The part that scared me was that I already knew they weren't, and the next piece would prove it. And if I didn't look for the next piece, I could still go back to thinking of myself as a loyal employee who'd gotten unlucky. Looking meant picking a side. What I didn't have was the why written down. And then I remembered that I did. A month earlier, Finance had sent the operations managers the annual cost reduction workbook for budget planning, the normal, tedious file we mark up every year. I'd skimmed it and moved on because it was consolidation season and I was busy. That night, I opened it again and went tab by tab. Tab 7. Comp Model B. Senior Comp Savings. $2.1 million annualized. 14 unnamed roles. Salary bands listed. I put it next to attachment C, and the bands matched, row for row, like a key sliding into a lock. The program hadn't started as an opportunity. It had started as a savings line. 14 of the most expensive tenures in the division modeled and totaled a quarter before anyone printed the word congratulations. I'll come back to tab 7. There was a column on it I didn't understand yet. Acceptance assumption, 85%. Someone had planned for most of us to say yes, which raised a question I couldn't stop turning over. What was the plan for the ones who said no? The answer had a name, and I already knew it. Ernie Kowalski. Ernie was 61, a warehouse supervisor with 33 years in, the kind of man who could hear a bad bearing across a running floor. In February, 1 round before mine, Ernie had gotten a packet. Everybody knew he'd turned it down. His wife was 2 years from Medicare and the math didn't work. What everybody also knew, and nobody said out loud, was what happened next. In April, Ernie was redeployed. Night shift inventory audits at the satellite warehouse, 25 miles from his house. A man with 3 decades of day shift seniority, counting bin locations at 2 in the morning. I drove out to see him on a Thursday night, brought coffee, and watched him scan shelves while we talked. He didn't want sympathy, and he didn't want trouble. But when I told him about my packet, he set down the scanner, went to his truck, and came back with a folder. His February packet, same format, same friendly font, and in the back, the same disclosure table with the same kind of ages. And the transfer memo from April, reassignment based on business needs. 2 sentences long, signed by someone at corporate he'd never met. They didn't fire me, Ernie said, in the flattest voice I've ever heard him use. Firing me would have cost them. They just made every shift a reason to wish I'd signed. He looked down the empty aisle. Frank, I'm the sales brochure for round 2. You understand that, right? Every guy who got your packet knows where I am at 2 a.m. Before I left, he told me the detail that stayed with me the whole drive home. When he declined in February, nobody argued. Nobody even seemed disappointed. Susan had simply nodded and made a note, and 6 weeks later the transfer memo arrived, polite as a parking ticket. That's the part people don't get, Ernie said. There was no fight. There's never a fight. There's just the next document. I drove home with his folder on the passenger seat and the heater off because I wanted to stay sharp. And somewhere on that dark highway, tab 7's last column finally translated itself. An 85% acceptance assumption isn't a prediction. It's a quota, and Ernie was the budget line for enforcing it. Voluntary. The word had a whole machine behind it now. A savings target, a tailored list, a deadline set against the pension calendar, and a demonstration project named Ernie Kowalski for anyone who thought declining was a real option. The next morning, the building felt different. Not hostile, quieter. The loading dock supervisor, who usually called out a greeting when I walked the floor, gave me a nod and turned back to his clipboard. 2 guys from receiving who'd always had a minute to talk about Sunday football had their conversation trail off as I approached, not because they were talking about me, but because nobody knew what was safe to say anymore. The packet does that to a room. It makes everyone wonder who's next, and the man holding one becomes a mirror nobody wants to look into. I ate lunch at my desk that day. It was the first of many. That weekend, I did the thing I'd been putting off. I asked Walt straight, in his office, door closed, 25 years on the table between us. To his credit, he didn't perform surprise. He took off his glasses, which is what Walt does instead of sighing, and he told me the truth in the tired voice of a man who'd been carrying it. The number came down from corporate finance in the fall. A senior comp savings target, non-negotiable. HR built criteria to hit it. Walt had argued for 2 names to come off the list. He didn't say whose, and I didn't ask, and was told the criteria had to be applied consistently. Then he signed the roster because, as he put it, it was going to happen with me or without me, Frank. I thought with me, it'd land gentler. I asked him if he thought it had landed gentler on Ernie. Walt put his glasses back on and didn't answer, and the not answering was the most honest thing he said all day. He gave me one piece of advice on my way out. Take the package. Round 2 is never better. 19 days left on my window. I believed his warning. I just no longer believed it was the only option because, unlike February, somebody now had all the paper in one folder. I want to be honest about the weekend that followed because it was the low point. Rosa and I sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs going cold and did the arithmetic of being 58. How long the enhancement would last, what the job market says to a man my age no matter what the law says it can't, what 18 more months of night audits had done to Ernie's health. Rosa listened to all of it and then asked the only question that ever mattered. If you sign it, whose decision was it? I didn't answer her that night. I went out to the garage and stood at the workbench for a while, the way I do, and I thought about the men I'd watched take packages over 25 years. Good operators, most of them who signed because the folder was glossy and the deadline was close and nobody had ever taught them that a deadline is a design choice. Somebody picks the date. So me body picked mine. 25 years of loyalty had taught me to solve problems inside the building. But the building was the problem now. The target came from above Walt. The criteria came from beside Susan, and every internal door led to someone whose name was already on the paperwork. That's the moment the normal channels stop being channels. So on Monday, I took a personal day, put on the suit I wear to funerals, and sat down across from an employment attorney with a folder organized the way I'd organize a doc audit. Chronological, labeled, sourced. Watch how fast the company's answers come back in this next part. The reply times tell the story better than the replies do. She went through it without a word for a long time. Attachment C. My roster comparison. Tab 7. Ernie's transfer memo. The pension summary with the milestone circled. Then she looked up and said something I've repeated to a dozen people since. Do you know what's unusual here? Nothing you show me was hidden. They disclosed the ages because the law made them. They mailed you the savings model themselves. Companies usually make me dig. Yours did the filing for me. She was careful with me, the way good lawyers are. This wasn't a lottery ticket. Age cases are hard, and Hartwell would have explanations rehearsed. She also told me what pushing back could cost. If the company dug in, I'd spend my last working years in depositions instead of on my dock floor, and the 13 other names might scatter rather than stand. You have one advantage most clients don't, she said. You're not asking them to admit anything. You're asking them to match their own cover letter. That's the cheapest yes a company can buy. But that wasn't the play. The play was narrower and faster because 14 people had a window closing, a letter on behalf of me and Ernie, with the other 12 notified of their right to counsel, laying out the documents and asking not for damages, but for the program to become what its own cover letter claimed it was. Voluntary. Time past the milestone dates. A bridge that didn't quietly amputate pensions. The redeployment stick in writing withdrawn. Companies fight about money for years, she said, signing the engagement letter. They fix process problems in a week, especially when the exhibit list is their own paperwork. I drove home with the signed copy on the passenger seat and the weight of 13 other names I'd never asked to carry. Rosa was waiting at the kitchen table with the same 2 mugs, and I sat down across from her and told her what I'd done. Not as a decision I was defending, just as a fact I needed her to know before I could hold it myself. She reached across and took my hand, and we sat like that for a long time, with the engagement letter between us on the table, before either of us said another word. The letter went out with 11 days left on my window. 2 days later, my cell phone rang at 7 p.m., Meredith Crane herself. I knew the name from the authorization line before I heard her voice. She had a way of pausing a beat before every sentence, as if testing the air before committing to it. The program timeline, the firm deadline. Her voice was calm, the calm of someone whose processes had never been questioned, not the calm of someone who had answers. I told her my attorney was handling further questions. The call lasted 2 minutes and said nothing I didn't already know, but the fact that she called at all from that level told me the letter had landed where it was meant to. Day 3, Walt walked past my open office door without stopping. No nod, no raised hand, just the deliberate avoidance of eye contact that only a direct instruction could produce. The company was tightening the circle. They were showing me, in the quietest possible language, that this would not be a passive wait. Hartwell's first answer arrived on day 4, and it was exactly the sentence I'd been promised. The program reflects an ongoing effort to reshape the senior experience profile. It's voluntary and lawful. Eligibility is role-based. A paragraph of adjectives built around Meredith Crane's chosen phrase. My attorney's reply was 1 page. No adjectives at all, just my roster comparison, formatted as a table. Every employee in the named role bands, age on the left, eligibility on the right. Every row over 55, eligible. Every row under not. And beneath the table, a single question, please identify the role-based criterion that produces this distribution. Companies can argue with a story. They cannot argue with a column. The response to the first letter had taken 4 days. The response to the table took 1, a meeting request. The morning between the request and the meeting, Meredith Crane came to the facility. I didn't see her arrive. I saw the ripple. 2 department heads I'd never seen on the warehouse floor walked past my office door within the same hour, not looking in, counting my position. Walt's door stayed closed all morning. She didn't come to my office. She didn't need to. The message was delivered by the fact that she was in the building at all. The VP of HR operations, in person, the same week my letter landed, visible enough to be seen, high enough not to need a reason. They were showing me the machinery before the negotiation started. We met on the same day, in the same conference room, where I presented the consolidation plan that spring. Susan Hale sat on one side with her folders squared. Next to her sat a woman I'd never met, Associate General Counsel, down from corporate, with the particular calm of someone sent to close a file, not defend it. Rosa pressed my funeral suit again that morning, and Ernie called before I left the house, not to coach me, just to say he'd worked a day's shift that week as a trial reassignment. They were already adjusting quietly before a single term was signed. Institutions do that. They start correcting the moment they understand you can read. I'd rehearse speeches in the truck. I never gave one. That's the strange mercy of doing this the copper way, with paper. There was nothing to shout about because there was nothing in dispute. When the general counsel said the program was role-based and appropriately designed, I slid the roster comparison across the table and said, "Then you can show me the column that designed itself around 55. She never conceded a single adjective after that, and then she agreed, in writing, to redesign nearly all of it. The word that had justified every exclusion had no defense when the list was laid flat. The window extended past the pension milestone dates of every eligible employee, all 14, so no one's deadline landed short of their own line again. The enhancement, recalculated with a bridge covering the vesting gap for the 4 of us caught in that trap. For me, the difference between 6 months' salary and my actual number. The phrase redeployment review struck from the program documents, company-wide, with a letter to that effect in every packet holder's file. And Ernie Kowalski restored a day's shift at his home facility. The April transfer memo formally rescinded, his commute and his sleep handed back to him like they'd never been taken. One more term, the one I'd insisted on, independent pension counseling on the company's account for all 14 names on attachment C, because half the people on that list had been about to sign away money they never knew was on the table. As the meeting broke up, Susan Hale gathered her folders and paused at the door, off script for the only time in all the months I'd known her. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "attachment C was my memo. Legal said the disclosure had to go in, and I formatted it so the ages lined up in one column." She shifted the folders on her arm. I always hoped somebody on that list would actually read it. I think about that a lot. Somewhere inside the machine that built the program, one person had set the truth where it could be found and waited 2 rounds for a reader. The 18 months after were quieter than you'd think. Some of the 14 took the improved package, and for a few of them, it was right. Dottie in quality had grandkids in Tucson and left laughing, with her full bridge and her counseling sessions math in her purse. Some stayed. That was always the point. The win was never keeping everyone. It was returning the choice. Corporate got its savings eventually, a year late, through honest attrition, a fraction of the $2.1 million they'd modeled in tab 7, the way it should have the first time. The floor treated me differently for a while. Not worse, just carefully, the way you treat a man who's been to a place you haven't. A couple of the younger supervisors started reading their own paperwork differently too. Marisol keeps a folder now, labeled in marker, and told me it was my fault. I've been blamed for worse. Walt retired that winter, first man out under the amended terms, which had a symmetry to it I've decided not to enjoy. We still have coffee. The friendship survived at a lower temperature. Some things carry a scar and function fine. He never apologized in words. He shows up at my house with good bourbon at unstructured intervals, which for Walt Brenner is the same sentence. What did it cost me? I'll tell you plainly, the specific comfort of believing that 25 years buys you a different category. It doesn't. Loyalty is real, but it lives in people, In Walt's 2 names argued, in Susan's 1 column formatted. Never in programs. Programs reshape your experience profile, whether you want it reshaped or not. Programs read birth dates. I don't hand my trust to letterhead anymore, and I'm at peace calling that wisdom instead of bitterness. I crossed my milestone on a Tuesday in March, 30 years and 60 years old inside the same season, and I worked on because the consolidation deserved finishing. And then, the following June, I submitted my last quarterly staffing roster, the working document I'd kept for a quarter century, the one I'd used to catch them. There was one new row on it. My own. Status. Retirement. Effective June 30th. The date in my handwriting on the left, where I've signed everything my whole career. 25 years of reading other people's lists. The last one finally had my name on it, in my writing on my date. Some choices at work can be taken from you quietly, on paper, which means paper is also where you take them back. If that packet landed on your desk at 58, would you sign inside their window or read attachment C first, the way Frank did? Tell me in the comments. And if stories like this resonate with you, subscribe to Copper Note.